Welcome to Look to Boston with Mayor Walsh. I'm your host, Lois Leonard, and today we're in the mayor's office in Boston City Hall for an up-close and personal conversation with the mayor. In his recent State of the City address, he urged us all to look to Boston as the leader of cities. Let's find out why.
If you want to learn how to bring people together, not push them apart, look to Boston. If you want to cut crime, protect the environment, lift Americans up, leave no one behind, at a time when cities must lead, look to Boston, the leader of cities.
Well, Mayor, thank you so much for inviting us into your office today.
It's great to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much. You know, in your recent State of the City address, you proclaimed that you love your job. So I believe it's a very lucky person who can say that they love their job. What did you mean by that?
It's an amazing job. No 2 days are ever the same. The issues vary. So start the morning off in a nice, steady pace, and then by the afternoon it's completely upside down.
Everything's changed.
But you can do so many great things. You can really have an impact on people's lives. And there are tough challenges that you face as mayor. Obviously, when you get a call on a violence, on somebody who lost their life, or you hear a story about something that's going on in our schools, or there's challenges to it, but you can make real impact by the policies and the people that work for the city of Boston. And I feel good on we're going to talk about this today, but I feel really good on some of the policy areas that we've advanced on: housing, economic development, schools, those different programs. I feel really, climate. I feel good on the gains that we've made in those areas, and we have real good, solid foundation moving forward.
And you have a wonderful support staff as well.
I'm so blessed. I have great people that work for the city, 18,000 employees. That includes everybody, and everyone's committed and dedicated, and I think it's important to thank people for the work they do, because they do the work of the city. I mean, I get, I guess, the credit, if you will, for good things that happen in the city of Boston, but it's the people that work with me every day that do the work.
Sure. Well, also during your State of the City address, you said that the White House has turned its back on the issues of climate change, but you said that Boston believes in science. What did you mean by that?
Well, the White House, this administration in Washington now basically has said that climate change is not real, and there's enough scientific evidence to prove that that climate change is a real issue that we're dealing with in this world. It's not just here in Boston. And as we think about the moving forward of Boston, we're dealing with sea level rise. We're dealing with wanting to reduce carbon emissions by 2050. We're dealing with opportunities to clean the environment, and I think that we have a responsibility for the future generations to do that. Quite honestly, we're the ones who have polluted the environment, human beings throughout the world. And in our city, we've worked on a couple different plans. One is Carbon-Free Boston, which is to be carbon neutral by 2050, but also looking at other ways of protecting the environment, and Resilient Boston Harbor, which is dealing with sea level rise that we have in the city. We see it on normal high tides, that the sea is rising, and we're a sea coast town.
Right.
We have 47 miles of coastline, and we have a plan now for much of that 47 miles of coastline to protect the city of Boston, protect its people, protect its assets, protect its property, protect business, economic development, and jobs, by creating barriers, if you will, for connecting people back to the ocean.
In fact, you've actually named your program Climate Ready Boston.
Yeah.
Which is, it sounds wonderful, and Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts is attempting to be carbon-free 80% by 2050.
Yeah.
But the city of Boston, you're proclaiming you'd like to be 100%.
Yeah, we're going to have to be 100% eventually in the state as well. And I know the state, I'm not talking for the state, but they're eventually going to have to get there, and we're all going to have to get there, because it just can't, it doesn't work. And Boston's been a leader in the area of climate change for a long time, and we've done a lot of talking and a lot of planning, and now we're implementing these plans and these ideas. And it's important for us, as we continue to be a leader. The state will look to Boston, other cities looking to Boston on seeing what we're doing, and we just have to continue. And I'm part of it's called the U.S. Conference of Mayors from around America. And some cities are where we are, and some cities are a lot further behind us, but they all understand the importance of this issue of being carbon-free, carbon
The technology's in place, but funding and
funding's an issue. Not having, we have a good partner in the state here in Massachusetts, in Boston, that is doing a lot more in this area. The Speaker and the Governor and the Senate President have all made this a centerpiece of their legislative term this year. Their legislation, so that's going to be important for us as well. You know, they're going to put out guidelines for the Commonwealth. It's ultimately up to cities and towns how to carry out this work.
Much of the emission problems come from our buildings, our structures, and the majority of it. So with much of the new construction that's going on in the city of Boston, they must be addressing these issues.
We're working with the BPDA in putting in some new building regulations to be able to not have to go back and retrofit these buildings. But we also have an older housing stock. I think we have about 70,000 buildings in the city of Boston. Eventually we have to think about how do we retrofit these buildings and how do we make sure they're doing the being efficient, if you will.
Yeah.
That's where our biggest challenge is going to come. That's where we're really going to have to think about new construction. We can figure that out, and we're doing a pilot program now, and we're going to start to change our building standards over the next several years. It's the buildings, the pre-existing buildings. We have many of our buildings were built in the early 1900s, and they're not going anywhere. And they're big, strong buildings, but we have to think about how do these buildings get retrofitted, and what are some of the programming and the incentives that we can do to have building owners really start to take this serious.
Well, you know, the city of Boston has a lot to be proud of. And what comes to my mind is that we are now ranked #2 in the nation for moving people up from the middle class, and also we're considered #1 for getting a job in the world. Yeah. How did Boston get here?
A lot of it was through job training. A lot of it was recognizing that we have a huge income disparity issue here in the city, as well as many cities around America. But acknowledging it and working on it's important. We still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of work to do. The number, being #1 and #2 respectively, are great to be able to say we're doing much better than the rest of the country. But when you look at the issue inside of Boston and you realize that not everyone is in that ranking, we have more work to do. So part of it's through job training, part of it's through understanding the way we've changed inclusionary development, creating more housing, more opportunity for people to not only live in a home but buy a home, first-time homebuyer programs, looking at helping people build wealth through our economic mobility lab, and how do we create opportunities for people to understand what credit scoring means and different things like that, working with our young people in our schools, making sure that we're putting them on a pathway to career or college. So it's a combination of a whole bunch of folks working together and a whole bunch of different departments working together, as well as the outside community, and having business understand this as well, and recognizing that they have a role to play in helping us move people up into the middle class.
And attracting new businesses.
Every day, bringing new business into the city is so important, and diversity of businesses. It can't all be just in the biotech tech sector. It's in life sciences. It's in financial institutions. It's in law. It's in a whole bunch of different areas. So making sure that we stay diversified as well in our business area. Just because in a down economy, if all your investments or all your focus is on one industry and that industry goes out, then there's troubles. And that happened kind of in Detroit when the car industry kind of collapsed. Sure. We saw a lot of people moved out of the city and moved out of the region, and now Detroit's reinventing itself and diversifying the businesses, which is great. Their number one product is still creating vehicles, but it's how do you create opportunities for more people?
Well, one of the things that you're still concerned about, though, is chronic homelessness, especially those of our veterans. What progress has been made?
We've made incredible progress in the area of homelessness. In the last 5 years, we've housed 1,600 chronically homeless people in the city of Boston, and that's veterans and non-veterans individual homelessness. We've taken about 4,500 years of homelessness off the street. And in my second swearing in, rather than having a big party, we usually have an inauguration party, we decided not to do that, and we decided to ask people to donate to a fund called Boston's Way Home Fund to raise $10 million to build more housing for chronically homeless veterans and homeless folks. So I feel pretty good where we're going. We have a system now in place for homelessness where we didn't have a system before. In the past, we housed homeless people. Now we have a system for how to get homeless people out of homelessness.
And your administration is systematically going through every single person. You've actually gone out and named every homeless person.
Yeah, we know who's on the street.
Yeah.
We know, so, and partly that's to if somebody new appears on the street that we're not sure who they are, we can try and find out what's going on. It's not just the city of Boston, it's the nonprofits as well, like places like Pine Street Inn and Rosie's Place and St. Francis House and Bridge Over Troubled Waters. So we're working collectively as one unit right now, and that's key. You know, not every homeless person wants to come in, which is another challenge we have. There are people that, we did the homeless census count in January. It was a freezing cold night, and there were people out on the street. It was like 7 degrees below zero, and there were people on the street that just didn't want services. They didn't want to come into a shelter. They have no desire for an apartment. So it's kind of like, we're also working with folks on that to try and convince them why it's important to really take care of themselves.
You know, we've heard you talk to this issue many, many times. It seems like it's almost a bit personal.
It is personal in a way, because you think about these folks. They at one point they lived in a house, they were kids, they went to school, they were loved, and they still might be loved by people, but they just feel that their life is worthless. And how do we make sure that they understand that the city that they're in loves them and wants to see them back on their feet and wants to see them be successful and see them move forward? So that's our responsibility.
But of course, for continued success, affordable housing is extremely important.
It is.
And I believe on the federal level, there really is no housing programs in place. But here in Boston, you are attacking this issue.
Yeah, we have some major problems with the federal government because we've seen a lack of investment in HUD. That's our public housing. We've seen in the city in 2015, the city of Boston, we do our budget, the majority of the Boston Housing Authority money came from the federal government, so the money didn't come out of our general fund. In 2015, we started to have to support the Boston Housing Authority because of cutbacks in the federal government. So that's one aspect of housing, and we're going to continue to make investments in public housing to make sure that people who live in public housing live in good, safe, clean environments, and we're working towards some ideas on how to do that. On the other side, which is all one issue, when I became mayor in 2014, we realized that there was a housing crisis going on. There were people that wanted to come into the city of Boston. Families that lived here were being pushed out of the city of Boston. There really wasn't a plan to build major housing. So we launched a housing plan along with Sheila Dillon and the Department of Neighborhood Development to create 53,000 units of new housing by the year 2030. Halfway through last year, we're heading towards hitting our goal far before 2030. So we raised that bar now to 69,000 units of new housing by 2030. And we're also working with regional mayors we came up with a plan regionally to create 185,000 units of new housing by the year 2030. Now, it sounds like a great idea. We break it down. You have low-income housing, moderate income housing, first-time home buyer programs, people who want to buy homes. So it's a gamut of housing options that we have to continue to work on, including our seniors, working to create more senior housing, and working with our college universities so that they will have 100% placement on campus, hopefully by 2030. What that does is free up housing stock in the neighborhoods.
Right.
It's complicated and
it is
big
very,
issue.
and each one of those categories is as important as the next.
It is, but there's a lot of interest in it.
Yes. Your Office of Housing Stability is doing great work.
Yeah, we created an Office of Housing Stability to keep people in their homes. We're working with folks that are that are worried about displacement. We're working with families that are worrying about evictions. We're worrying about people where banks are taking homes from folks. So we're working on those different areas. We put together a legislative package to deal with displacement, to deal with representation in courts. So we're working in a whole bunch of different areas. We sat down in this room that we're being interviewed in 3 years ago with the business community to say that we're going to raise inclusionary development from 13% to 18%, which has gained us, net us about $150 million to put into housing, affordable housing. So every opportunity and every option needs to be on the table for us to move forward.
And there's a lot of preventative work that's being done through that office.
Yeah, the housing stability is really about prevention. I mean, we don't want to get to a situation where somebody's being evicted or not understanding the importance of their housing.
And there's a lot of questions that office can ask. I'll have to say, go online.
Yeah, cityofboston.gov webpage.
Yeah.
Everything we talk about today, there's an answer or a backup or something on there for you.
You also recently announced an additional $26 million going back into the city.
Affordable housing. We have that going to affordable housing, and also the Community Preservation Act money going to affordable housing. So these are investments made by the city into affordable housing. So we're going to continue to make these investments in key housing programs.
Well, everyone deserves a good home. Everyone deserves a good job. Another part of the puzzle is good transportation. And here in Boston, we now have designated bike lanes. I see better lane markings. What's the next step?
We need to continue to do more on bikes. We have a pretty aggressive transportation plan that we're looking at all different modes of transportation, cars, bikes, pedestrians, walking, working with the state on their infrastructure improvements. They want to invest $8 billion over the next 5 years in public transportation. A large portion of that will come to the city of Boston transit areas. So, we still have work to do. In dedicated bike lanes, we have, I don't know what the full total, we have some dedicated bike lanes, but not nearly enough for the full 800 miles of roads that we have in the city of Boston. So we're working on continue to ramp those programs up. And again, not to pass along the buck to somebody else, but no federal policy. So when you think about the three big issues three of the biggest issues we're being faced with in the future, housing, climate, transportation, no federal policy. Bickering back and forth about what color the sky is when they really should be focused on how do you help the American people. And these challenges that we're facing here in Boston aren't just about Boston.
Right.
They're about
every city.
Other cities and other cities all across America in both rural and urban areas. So we have to, it shouldn't be one area versus another. We should be thinking about America as a whole and how do we move America forward.
And the more work we do with public transportation, the closer we get to that carbon-free atmosphere.
Yeah, and some cities and towns are doing great work on the environment stuff. I mean, we've all very dedicated and committed to reducing emissions and having a better environment here. On the housing stuff and in the education and transportation stuff, that is more of a local type of local regional approach. So again, we're working on those locally and regionally. It happens in other cities, but it affects what happens here in Boston and regionally a little more than a global scale. So
we're trying to create a better world for our young people.
Absolutely. My parents are immigrants. They came from Ireland. They came to this country. My father was able to get a job. They were able to buy a home, get married, have kids, live the American dream. They weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but they had access. I'm worried that our next generation won't have that same access, and I think that we have to make sure that they do have that access.
Let's talk a little bit more about our young people, because I think we'd like to speak to education. The state of our public schools has been a concern for decades, and we are making progress. So we're in a much better place now. Many of the schools have reached a level 1 or 2 status. So how did we get to that?
A lot of investment and a lot of working to get collaboratively together. I mean, we don't hear the good stories that much, and there's been a lot that's been done with our schools. I think one of the first things we're able to do is extend the day. We used to have one of the shortest school days in the country, and now we don't have that problem anymore.
How hard was that to get?
Not that hard. I mean, we were able to sit down with the teachers union and come up with an agreement, and they understood that it was an important aspect as well. So we were able to, because there's more professional development time as well for our teachers in that extra time. So that's one aspect. Universal pre-kindergarten, working towards universal pre-K. We've added 1,000 extra universal seats to have young people getting into school earlier, something that's really key for us. Focusing on some of our learning programs and making investments in those areas, focusing on our special SPED kids and kids that have special needs and that need extra supports, working with those folks as well. We still have some work to do on our high schools. I mean, we had a report that came back last year that wasn't really wasn't a flattering report about high schools. Not all, but select high schools. Some schools that have a mission, we're seeing them do really well. And some schools we need to continue to make. When I say investments, I don't mean just financial investments. I'm talking about human capital and people in those, and programming and things that happen, and working to let young people know that we love them and that we want them to be as successful as they possibly can be.
And as you're looking for a partner in a school superintendent, what are the qualities that matter to you the most?
I think that we need somebody that understands systems and understands that can manage people and is a great recruiter of talent. I think that there's a lot of different aspects to a superintendent that we could talk for an hour and a half about. But I really think about somebody that understands systems, and it's a very big system, our school department, roughly 8,000 employees. We have 57,000 kids, 125 schools, 22 different grade configurations, 22 different start times.
How to remember all these numbers?
So we have a system that's complicated. that we need somebody that can come in and manage the system and make some targeted changes that need to be made. We have to continue to get more resources and better programming to our kids.
Well, we've also created, or you've created, more free tuition for some of our community colleges.
Community college. Yeah, that's a program we launched a couple years ago, and one of the things that there was an obstacle for our young people that couldn't afford to go to college. So a lot of them have the idea that I'll take a couple years off and go back to college, and that doesn't happen that way. So we have a program with Bunker Hill Community College, Roxbury Community College, and Bay State Community College to have free community college tuition for our kids, so they get a couple of years of education on their belts. And we're working with other schools like BU and other places to help them get into those schools after that if they keep it 3.0 grade point average and with low debt. So I mean, some of the kids that we're talking about are very low income families that don't have the means, and a lot of immigrant families that don't have the means, and they should have the same options and rights as everyone else. So we're trying to create more opportunities for people, and the state's looking at this program now too.
And again, that's a great example of one of the reasons why our city is rising up into the middle class.
Well, other cities are following
right?
us. I mean, they're on all the different plans that we have, other cities are following us. I was talking to Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, and he has a similar program in Chicago. And the importance of that is key to the future of the city, that we have to create opportunities for our kids. And you know, when you look at the disparities in society, particularly in America and in Boston, the wealth gap between white families and black families and Latino families is a big gap. And you know, to be a city for everybody, we have to address those issues. And you know, we've talked about it for a long time, and we've set some policy in place, but we actually are tackling the issues and not afraid to tackle the issues. So when we think about families, we need to make sure we close those wealth gaps. We need to make sure that we close inequality gaps. We need to make sure that we tackle racism and make sure we tackle education. And then the other stuff is climate and transportation and infrastructure. All of those things all come together.
And you also recently announced that applications are now being accepted for the 2019 the City of Boston Scholarship Program.
Yeah, I think we were about 150 kids, or no, about 120 kids last year in the scholarship program. $300,000 in scholarship funding, and then this year we want to up that number by about 30. So we're trying to encourage young people to sign up and get involved, and it will help. It's a small amount, but it will help add to the pie of the bigger bill.
Every little bit helps.
It does.
And including Success Link is another program for summer jobs.
Yeah, summer job program. I think it's open until April 12th. The kids can sign up, young people can sign up, ages 15 to 18 for summer jobs. A lot of these summer jobs are partnering with private companies and private firms. Some of those programs are working with us. Some work in City Hall and work in the mayor's office. So it's a great way for a young person to spend their summer.
You know, Mayor, it seems that most of us watch the news, we listen, and we worry, and we wonder what's happening to our country, our cities. We wonder if our leaders are people we want to follow. Do they have integrity? Do they deserve our respect? And yet so few of us actually go into public service. Yeah. So I'd like to ask you, how did you make your choice? What was your path?
It was a different time. When I ran for office in 1997, I did it because I always was involved in the community and I wanted to make a difference, and I ran for state representative, and when I ran there was 7 of us that ran, and it was this.
Let me ask, how were you involved with the community though? Because you were young.
Yeah, I coached, I ran the Little League, I coached basketball, I coached hockey, I was involved in my civic association, I was the president, I was active, I got involved in issues. I mean, it was kind of, in my family, there was always activism going on in the house. And for me, it was just one of those things. It was just natural, and I just liked it.
Yeah, you sat at the dinner table and you discussed issues.
Yeah, it was just something I enjoyed, and so as I got a little older, an opportunity presented itself to run for state representative, and I threw my hat in the ring, and you know, there was 7 people that ran, and it was a great race, spirited race. I won, and for 16 years I served as a state legislator, and it was amazing because I got a chance to kind of really have an impact on people's lives being a legislator, and I enjoyed it. And then I ran for mayor in 2014, and I think the difference today is a lot of people are turned off by public service. Not necessarily working in government, but running for office. And I think that, you know, that's that's a statement, and it's not just America. It's Boston and Massachusetts and America. It's all over the world, and I think that hopefully adjusts itself, because I think we need to get more people engaged in the process.
We need to have respect for those people who want to run for office and give them a chance.
I mean, you know, if you put your name on the ballot for whatever you're running for, you're putting your whole public life your whole life on the ballot to be public, and it's complicated and challenging, and some people are trying to say, oh, I don't want any piece of that right now, and so I hope it changes, because it'd be great to see people be more engaged. I mean, this presidential election that we're having in 2020, you know, in the Democratic side, I think there's 7 or 8 candidates running already. That's good. That's good for democracy. I mean, I think that having people wanting to be president and sharing ideas and talking about it and raising the bar and raising the dialogue and the conversation is so important for the future of America.
You mentioned you're traveling quite a bit. You speak to a lot of other mayors. You go across the country. I'm curious, what kind of reaction do you get from other mayors from other cities? What kind of questions do they ask you about Boston?
Well, you know, they know Boston's going through a boom, a lot of them, and some of their cities are going through a boom as well. And, you know, basically the biggest thing, we share best practices, we share ideas. We talk about challenges that we might have. We talk about how do we handle those challenges, and I think that that's something that's important. The Conference of Mayors is an organization that is nonpartisan. You know, we have Republican mayors, we have Democratic mayors, and we don't get caught up in the rhetoric of what's happening in Washington. We talk about the issues that we need to move forward in Washington, but we don't get caught up in the rhetoric of you're a Democrat, I'm a Republican, everything you say is wrong, everything I say is right. We don't get caught up in that world. We just kind of think about how do we get to move our cities forward, which means we're moving America forward.
Thank you so much.
This is great.
Thank you for joining us. I hope we can do it again soon. I think there'll be much to talk about.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, our viewers, for watching. I believe today's conversation with the mayor is vital to the success of our city. Mayor Walsh can't do it alone. It's our responsibility to stay informed and be involved. That's how we'll keep Boston strong. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lois Leonard, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Look to Boston with Mayor Walsh.